Where's my wormhole? This is a problem. Okay, so our wormhole back to Thera is gone. It had plenty of time and plenty of mass left on it when we came through, which means that someone, probably that fleet, maybe someone decided to intentionally close this wormhole by going through the tedious effort of jumping a bunch of large ships back and forth through until the mass limit was reached, and then the wormhole collapses. And that's the only way this wormhole kind of closed in the 1 hour that we were out here. Now, what this means is that in order to get back into Thera, we're going to need to navigate to another system with an in-hole. And foolishly, I didn't bring a core scanner probe and probe launcher with me. I was thinking to myself before we left Thera in the Catalyst that we shouldn't leave in a ship that can't scan a way back in. Which means that in order to get back into Thera, we are first going to need to fly to a system where we have probes. We're actually not that far from Utopia, where we've got a bunch of stuff, but that's from before we built the probes and the probe launchers. So that's not going to help us. We're really going to have to fly to either Minar or Albrez. Oh no, that's not true. That's not true. We have so much ISK. And we have materials to build. All we have to do is fly to the nearest station that sells probe launcher blueprints and probe blueprints, and then we can build our own. Nobody sells probe blueprints in Immensity. To Eve Tycoon. Okay, so it's exclusively Concord and DED stations that sell them, which means that we can just use the in-game corporation browser to find the nearest station. Concord, nearest station, Sendaya, 10 jumps. Perfect. All we have to do is navigate 9 jumps of nullsec, and we can build ourselves some probes with which to get back into Thera. Oh man. Okay. This is entirely on me. But I will note that in fact, the Eve Scout website says there is also a Thera in-hole in Derelict, just a couple of jumps away from Sendaya. So despite this being an absolutely ridiculous problem to have caused ourselves, we might be able to solve it. Now it's probably going to get less quiet as we get closer to the border of Lowsec. And why is my local chat is broken? There's a fleet here and local is still showing as being empty to me. I'm having a chat bug. This is a problem. Well, I'm gonna die here. I'm gonna die here with nobody in local. This is pretty darn frustrating. I would never in a million years have warped gate to gate there if I had seen those people in local. I was killed by a bugged out local chat. Well, at least I've got a faster way back to Thera. Well, we have learned several important lessons on this adventure. I'm not sure I have the mental fortitude to enumerate all of them right now. And the most frustrating lesson that we've learned is don't trust the client. This is Bill. Bill wants to build a Cynabal and join the Angel Cartel cause in Zarzak, but he's not making it easy on himself. Okay, I've taken a little time to reflect, and I think I'm ready to talk about lessons learned. Before we do, though, it's important to remember that that loss didn't really set us back. It hurt, but it mostly hurt because we'd gotten so excited about that True Sancha multi-spec. Really, all that we lost here was a mostly Tech 1 fit catalyst and about an hour of our time. We're gonna be fine. That said, it is worth talking about how we can avoid similar losses in the future. Now, we would not have died there if it weren't for the client screwing up. If I had seen those people in local, there is no way I would have warped blindly from gate to gate in nullsec, especially with valuable cargo in my hold. But the lesson that we need to learn here is not really don't trust the client. That's mostly useless. And in fact, by the way, if something like this happens to you, you can petition to have your ship returned if the reason that you lost it is clearly because of a game bug. I'm not going to do that because petitioning GMs to reimburse my losses seems entirely out of line with what Bill's trying to do. But if this happened to you, for sure, petition it. But as much as this specific loss wouldn't have happened without that bug, what I was doing could just as easily have led to an almost identical loss. That flycatcher and those stabbers could just as easily have been on the other side of that gate. I would have landed on the gate, jumped through, and then been in exactly the same position. So there is another lesson I could learn here, which is that I should have been more paranoid. When I jumped into that system, I did see on D-scan that there was an interdictor bubble at the other gate. Not the gate that I warped to, not the gate I'd come through, but a third gate. And I thought to myself, oh, that's weird. Interdictor bubbles only last 60 seconds, and there's nobody in local. So I assumed that meant that there had just been a fight at the other gate, and the interdictor had jumped through chasing somebody. Which is part of why I was in such a rush to get through the system. But I definitely should have been at maximum alert, because regardless of whether or not local's empty, if there's an interdictor bubble on scan, there was a fight here just a moment ago, and there's no way of knowing for sure which way all of the different combatants went. So even though I did die to a client bug, I'm not really going to lay this loss entirely at the feet of that bug. Because I also wouldn't have died if the wormhole hadn't closed behind me. Now, we made sure before we jumped out that wormhole had lots of time left on it and that it had lots of mass on it. But our second lesson we need to learn is we need to remember that wormholes can be intentionally collapsed. The time limit is the time limit, but the mass limit can obviously be manipulated. Someone who doesn't want that wormhole to be there can jump a whole bunch of high mass ships back and forth through it, and poof, the wormhole's gone. That fleet of 16 people that we saw, they may have been doing just that. People who live in wormholes will intentionally collapse their holes all of the time in order to get a new wormhole spawn to somewhere that might be more useful to them. Thera has so many wormholes that people generally don't feel the need to roll the holes in order to get better exits. But if a Thera hole goes to Sovereign Nullsec, for example, there is the real possibility that the people who live there won't want that connection and the traffic that comes with it, and they might roll that hole just to get their peace and solitude back. Now, we're going to keep going through Nullsec holes from Thera. We're not going to treat the possibility of the hole being rolled and intentionally collapsed as a reason never to go through Nullsec wormholes. But that does lead us to our third point, and one that I made very clearly in the previous episode. We're going to want to be carrying scanner probes on every ship that we take out of Thera. do not leave Thera without a probe scanner. Now, I didn't put probes on Corrine the Catalyst because fitting a probe launcher would have meant pulling a blaster. And while a 7 blaster catalyst still has pretty good DPS, if you're not running a full rack of blasters, you're missing the point of the catalyst. You might as well be flying something else with more utility. But I could have put a core probe launcher and 8 core scanner probes in Corrine's hold. If I had had a probe launcher, I wouldn't have had to fly back out to Empire space. I could instead have started flying to whatever the nearest other Nullsec Thera entrance was. That would have still been a dangerous journey, but when you're in deep Nullsec, flying back to Empire is, ironically, usually the most dangerous direction to go in. Now, of course, with the probe launcher in the hold of the catalyst, we would still have needed to find somewhere to refit, and free ports are hard to come by in Sovereign Nullsec, so we probably still would have ended up flying the dangerous route out to Empire space looking for a station. It would be much, much better to have the probe launcher already equipped when we leave Thera. And even though fitting a probe launcher to a catalyst is usually a mistake, there are other ships that have a utility high slot where a probe launcher can easily fit without making any compromises. Ships like the Thrasher. Now, we don't have a Thrasher blueprint in Thera yet, but as soon as a connection opens up that's close to Albrez, we're going to head out there and bring in a bunch of BPCs, and then we can build Thrashers here in Thera, put probe launchers on them, and use those for our Nullsec ratting adventures. Now, that will result in us having a little bit less DPS than we have in a catalyst, but we'll have a probe launcher, and we'll also have projectile weapons, which means selectable damage, so our effective DPS against any kind of rats other than Serpentis, basically, will actually go up. There is one thing we could do, though, that would allow us to still fly a catalyst with a full rack of blasters and retain the ability to scan down a new entrance to Thera. We could build a mobile depot. Mobile depots are structures that you deploy and anchor just like a bubble, and then once anchored, they let you refit in space. I looked at building one before because they're so useful, but the materials list is a little intimidating. Those are all pretty high tier planetary interaction components, and I did not want to deal with the PI. But I've realized the planets that we already have colonized already produce all of the basic materials required to build these more advanced PI components. All we would need to do is build an advanced factory setup on one planet and then move the necessary materials from the other planets to that one, and we could be building smart fab units, nuclear reactors, guidance systems, high-tech transmitters, basically right now. If we get another good exit to Minar, we will absolutely reconfigure our PI once again and look at buying a mobile depot blueprint. And for that matter, actually, we have a faction mobile depot blueprint that we got from a ghost site sitting out in Albrez. So if we find an exit to Albrez and an exit to Minar, we won't even need to buy a blueprint. The fourth lesson I want us to take from that outing is not directly related to the loss of the catalyst, but rather to the efficiency of what we were doing out there in the first place. Ratting for ISK and modules in a region of space with no asteroid belts is counterproductive. So the next time we go on an expedition like that, I'm going to use Dotlan in advance to see if there are belts out in that area of space, and if not, we'll go somewhere else. Dotlan will also tell us if there are any Freeport stations in that area of Nullsec, which will change our calculus for whether or not we need to bring a mobile depot. Oh, there's one more lesson, and it directly pertains to the fight. You probably noticed that once I got caught, I went down with guns blazing, as I always recommend that you do, and we almost killed that flycatcher. We got most of the way through his shields, even though we were flying away from him with blasters. I want everyone to remember to shoot back at the people who are shooting them, even if you didn't pick the fight. And we did that, but just shooting back is only step one. Once I realized we were never going to escape that bubble, I wish I had turned around and gone on the attack, zoomed in on that flycatcher and unleashed everything I had on him. We probably could have gotten that kill. A blaster web catalyst is a great matchup against an interdictor that's caught in the middle of its own bubble. Now, we probably still would have died there to those two stabbers, one of whom, by the way, is a member of the Malachim Zealots. Angel on angel violence, not okay. But it would have been really satisfying to get that flycatcher kill, and who knows? Our chance of escaping certainly would have been higher with the flycatcher dead than it was with it alive. So that's the last lesson. If you can't escape, go for the throat. And that's the debrief. This is what you do when you lose a ship. You analyze your loss, you figure out what you could have done differently, and you get back out there. Let's get back out there. Okay, so a wormhole has opened up in Thera that connects to Adil, just 2 jumps away from Manar. I'm going to take the opportunity to move in a few more things because we are fully committing to Thera as a home. Specifically, I want to move in some more catalyst hulls. So I'm going to fly out in Air and the Atron at first, bring in a little bit of cargo, and while I'm out there, I will reset my home station back to Manar briefly so that I can do the Pod Express ship ferry routine. There have been some people on the undock here, but there's no interdictors out right now. Combat scanner probes on scan. We don't want to sit in one place too long. Also, I've been making safe spots around the system near different celestials so that we can warp to the safe and descan the wormhole before we warp directly to it in case there's an interdictor or a hick sitting on the hole. The hole is clear, nothing on descan but a single combat scanner probe. So among the things that I want to bring in is actually a bunch of the contents of our junk folder. A bunch of the stuff that we put in here as junk is actually invention materials, and we're starting to think pretty hard about the possibility of doing some invention. And I think if we do it, we're going to do it in Thera. We just have to wait until a decent hole opens up near Albrez, and then we'll bring in all of our BPCs. So while we're waiting for that to happen, we can be staging all of our useful invention-related stuff from Manar into Thera, so we'll be ready to go. Also, in order to do invention, we're going to need these encryption skills that drop in data sites. We could bring the skill books in, but there's really no harm in just injecting them now. We're not going to train them yet until we're ready to actually do invention, but now they're safely stored in our character sheet and we don't have to risk losing them. Another weird and interesting thing that I noticed is these spatial attunement arrays, which are used to build Tech 2 scan arrays, actually reprocess into Tech 2 materials. So we're going to bring all of these in with us too, in case we do end up inventing and building Tech 2 modules. I haven't looked at it in any detail, but there's the possibility that reprocessing these spatial attunement units and getting the Fernite carbide, etc., may actually save us a step in the Tech 2 manufacturing process, which would be so welcome. I'm also going to bring in Olaf, our ice harvesting drone, in case when we do build a thorax, we find a good exit wormhole from Thera that lets us pop out and immediately mine Akaldari ice. And then I'm just going to fill Aaron up the rest of the way with modules that might be useful or might be reprocessable. And now we're going to set our home station back to this one, because the main thing that we want to bring in is some of these 7 catalysts, which we'll have to do one at a time. There's a saber sitting on our station. However, if we align to the station, as long as he doesn't have a bubble up at the moment we click warp, the bubble won't catch us. Flycatcher as well, we'll be able to see the bubbles on D-scan. I'm getting ready to click warp. Go. So we're in warp. Even if they put up bubbles now, we should still safely land at our dock bookmark. And all of our invention junk is now safely in Thera. Our hangar's getting full. I gotta say, I'm pretty excited when we do get a wormhole out near Albrez to bring in that station container blueprint. Now back to Manar, the fast way. everything we need to build a mobile depot, I think, is in production on this mess of a factory planet. Okay, we're gonna fly in these catalysts completely unfit. I'm pretty excited that it actually looks like we might end up using most of those 13 catalysts that we accidentally built. I did not foresee this. It will be very useful given that we don't have a catalyst blueprint in Thera yet to have a few backup hulls. There's 2 of me docked in this station. It's a weird UI bug, I think, from me undocking to the station and then very quickly self-structing back to it. Not 2 of me in local, but there's 2 of me here. I'm bringing in that Tech 2 Hobgoblin that we looted from that Heron way back in the day, because I do actually have the skills in the queue now, which would let me eventually use Tech 2 drones. Oh, it's finally happened. I've landed at my D-scan spot, and there are warp disrupt probes on scan. Presumably they are at the station. Yep, they're on 5 degrees at the station. Now this is in fact the last catalyst I was planning to bring in, and then I was going to log off in the station. But instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to warp to my deep safe, and I'll just log off in space. And then when I'm ready to play again, I will warp back over to my D-scan spot near the station, and hopefully there will not be an active interdictor sitting on it at that time. Okay, we're logging back into our safe spot. We're warping back over to our D-scan spot, and we're seeing that the coast is now clear. And look at this, 5 backup catalysts in our hangar in Thera, whole bunch of stuff too. Most notably, when I was moving in all those empty catalyst hulls, I filled each of them up with as much titanium as I could carry. So we're up to 180,000 titanium, which is enough to build a couple of destroyers or a handful of frigates. Things are looking good. Now let's find an outhole where we can actually do something. We'll just scoot by these hostiles here on the undock. Whoa! What the heck just happened? What even killed me? What even killed me? Whoa! That is a worrying development. Insta-locked and insta-blapped with artillery while warping to my undock bookmark. Wow. And we're back in Minar, because I forgot to reset my jump clone back to Thera after moving in those catalysts. And I just got an email from one of the guys who killed me saying that WeForm Volta has moved into that same station that I'm living in and will be camping it regularly. So we are going to keep that in mind. As for what we're going to do immediately, we don't have a scanning ship here currently, but we've got a shuttle. So what I propose we do is we fly this shuttle over to Albrez, put together a little package of things we want to bring into Thera, and then figure out where the nearest entrance is from there. Here we are in Albrez. It's been a while. I am still mulling over that Loki Instablap on the Thera undock. I've been thinking about that email that we got sent saying don't move into the Paleo-Cybernetic Station, and you know what? I can't bring myself to follow that advice. We're still going to live at the Paleo-Cybernetic Station. We're just going to learn how to be a little bit more careful on the undock. And now, to show just how fearless we are, we're going to start figuring out what blueprints we want to bring into Thera with us. Go back to Thera. Now, I know I talked a big game about ignoring the advice from that gentleman who emailed me to stay away from the Paleo station. I figured that that was just bluster. But then I looked at Thera's kill board. And in fact, if you look at the kills from the last week, you can see where in system most of them happened. And of the 4 stations in Thera, only one of the stations is in the top 10 locations for kills. And that station is Paleo-Cybernetics, which has 114 kills at it in the last week. 5 times as many kills as happened anywhere else. So it seems like randomly we picked the worst station to possibly be in Thera. So I think we might actually take that guy's advice, and we might move in with the stuff that we're bringing from Albrez into one of the other 3 stations. I'm looking at the Applied Gravitation Laboratory station because it also has a nice big undock area like the Paleo-Cybernetics did. Part of the reason I'm playing it a little bit cautious, to be honest, is because right now in Ansel the Atron, I am riding dirty. 263 million ISK estimated in my hold, a whole ton of salvage, and basically all of our data cores and decryptors, because I figure we're going to be building rigs in Thera, but we also might be doing invention in Thera very, very soon to build T2 rigs. So I want the T2 salvage, and I need the data cores, and I need the decryptors. And I've brought in a few modules that could be useful to us. And I filled the rest of Ansel's cargo space with 4 500 MN quad lift restrained microwarp drives. I've been intentionally saving and not reprocessing the 500 MN microwarp drives because we've talked before about how great those warp disruption field generators are for reprocessing into a whole ton of minerals and only taking up 50 cubic meters of cargo space. Well, a 500 MN microwarp drive reprocesses into even more minerals and takes up just 10 cubic meters of cargo space. It's about as efficient as you can get for transporting minerals in a small cargo hold. So these 4 microwarp drives alone are going to make a huge difference in what we can build in Thera, provided we get them there safely. And I'm currently flying to Melmaniel, which is a low-sec system in Verge Vendor, which Eve Scout's website tells me currently has an in-hold Thera. Ansel is fit for sub 2 second align, and I've even put our other 2 Tech 2 inertial stabilizers on him, as well as our Tech 2 damage control. So if we need to bug out, Ansel should be able to do it quite easily. If we jump through the wormhole and there's something like a bubble on grid, we can just jump straight back through and warp safely to a station in Melmaniel. If we are extremely cautious right now, we should have basically 0 chance of getting caught and killed in Ansel. Now we just have to scan down signature NJA. There it is. We're going to warp to it at 100 because as part of our extreme caution, we want to make sure that when we warp in to actually make the transit, we're warping to the wormhole itself and not the signature. In we go. Nobody on grid with us. We are going to warp first to our deep safe. And then we're going to look at the map and we're going to see where the Applied Gravitation Laboratory is. We'll drop a D-scan safe spot as we get close. There's a cyclone probably currently at the station. Now, just in case that cyclone is also fit for insta-lock, we're going to line towards the gravitation lab. We're going to wait for that cyclone to go off scan, and then we'll warp in. Pick to dock. And we are back in Thera. Let's set our home station. Let's get all this value out of Ansel. And I can immediately reprocess those 500 MNs, and that will give me more than enough minerals to get a Thrasher building. Now we just have to move the rest of our stuff from Paleo-Cybernetics to the Gravitation Laboratory. There's been some growing pains. It is scary in Thera, but we are not cowed. Okay, so I've flown my pod from our new base at the Thera Gravitation Lab back over to our old base at the Thera Paleocybernetics Institute. I would like to move some ships and modules and other things from this station, which has been camped by Volta, to the new station, which seems much quieter. I've set Volta to negative standings, so you can see the 3 people docking the station with the little orange boxes next to their name in the guest list are all members of Volta. So we know that there is a Volta contingent here. And in fact, if I undock, surprise, there is a Volta Loki once again camping the undock, sitting just behind the station, ready to one-shot with his artillery anyone who undocks and tries to warp away. So it's time to talk about how I could have avoided dying before. The first thing to note is that I made a very conscious choice to try warping away when I undocked and that Loki was there before. As you can see, I can undock over and over again. I can undock, look at this Loki, check out the situation. In the top left, I have an undock invulnerability timer counting down. And until that reaches 0, he can't target me. I'm slowly drifting away from the undock, but the station has a large undock perimeter, so anytime before that reaches 0, I could either stop my ship or just redock. Perfectly safely every time. When I undocked my catalyst before and saw that Loki there, I did not have to try and warp away. Again, this is the advantage of not living in a kickout station. I have time to make that decision, and I'm already within the redock perimeter. Now, I've burned insta-undock bookmarks, and the point of the insta-undock bookmark is that when I undock, I should be able to warp to it instantly. But in order to understand how that Loki was able to blap me the other day before I could warp to my insta-undock bookmark, we have to talk a little bit about the sort of crunchy math of how being aligned and how warping works. If you are aligned to something, then when you click warp, you warp instantly. The moment you give the command and the moment you enter warp are the same. There is no room for anything to happen in between. So if we undock and we are aligned to our instant undock, then we can warp to it and we cannot be targeted no matter how much scan resolution or anything the ships around us have. The question then becomes, what does it mean to be aligned? In order to enter warp to something, you need to be traveling at least 75% of your ship's maximum speed and traveling along a vector within 5 degrees of the object you want to warp to. When we undock, our ship gets kicked out with not only max velocity, but more than max velocity. So we have the velocity that we need to warp to a bookmark immediately. Oh, check it out. My undocking and redocking has now made them bring out a second Loki and a broadsword, so I won't be able to warp away anyways. But the question at hand is going to be, I've got the velocity I need to warp. Am I within 5 degrees of heading to my bookmark, if there was not a heavy interdictor on the field? And so when I do undock, you will always see I am flying out away from the station from the same point on the station model in roughly the same direction every time. And over there are my bookmarks. I'm flying towards them, but I'm not flying directly towards them. So to know if I can warp away safely, if there was not a Hector bubble here, I would need to know if the distance between my heading and where those bookmarks are is more or less than 5 degrees. And so the problem becomes apparent. This insta-undock bookmark I made is not directly ahead of me. It is down and to the right. When I clicked warp in my catalyst the other day, I had the velocity to warp, but my ship needed to change heading by about maybe 10 to 15 degrees in order to point down to my insta-undock. And that little adjustment in heading only takes about 1 second, about 1 server tick. But a Loki that is maxed out with scan resolution mods can lock a destroyer in less than 1 second. So he was sitting there spamming target with his guns already activated. So in that 1 second, while my ship was adjusting heading down to the insta-undock, he was able to target me, and he had enough alpha damage with his artillery to blast through my entire hit point buffer in 1 shot. I'm dead. I underestimated that Loki, is how I died. I saw that Loki on the undock, and what he was trying to do was entirely obvious. I knew the danger was there, but because I thought I was already prepared to warp, I figured there was no danger. And I was wrong. I was not prepared to warp. I had that tiny bit of aligning left to do. The other thing worth knowing, every time you undock, your ship leaves the station with a little bit of wiggle to its trajectory. So sometimes I'll be pointed more down towards my undocks, like this one, and other times when I undock, my ship will have had that wiggle pointed even further up and to the left, further away from my undock. So even if you have a bad undock, you can redock and undock safely over and over again until you get the good roll, which points your ship towards your kind of crappy undock. That also means that even if you've got an undock that is almost perfect, if it's off by just half a degree, there is the possibility that your undock random roll will skew the full 5 degrees, the maximum variation, away from it. Even a nearly perfect insta-undock can still sometimes not be a true insta-warp. Now, I have drawn so much attention from these guys by undocking and redocking over and over again. They're gonna sit here with their Lokis and their sabers for a while, expecting that eventually I'm gonna try and actually escape this station, and they'll have a chance to kill me. Which means that I do probably need to dock up and let the heat cool for a little bit before I show you the next step where I explain how we would actually safely get out of here. The thing we need to know is, with the random skew of our undock trajectory, are we within 5 degrees of our insta-undock bookmark? You can sort of try and eyeball it from here, but in fact there's another tool. Down at the bottom of the screen, just to the left of your capacitor and shields, there's actually a first-person camera, and you can get a really good sense of how closely you're pointed towards anything. Now we're going to undock again with first-person camera already active. The first-person view in this game is almost entirely useless. It's a toy, but there are 1 or 2 situations where you really need to know what your ship is pointed at, and trying to undock is one of them. I believe these ticks are degrees, but even if they're not precisely degrees, they give you a pretty good sense of how far something is out from true center. And it looks like we're about 6 degrees up. We're pointed about 6 degrees up from all of our bookmarks. And in fact, it turns out that our deep safe off-axis bookmark is actually a better undock than the insta-undock bookmark we created. And you can see this time how our random shuffle has actually pointed us below these bookmarks rather than above. And from here, if we try and warp to our deep safe off axis, I'm pretty sure we're actually within the 5 degrees. Oh no. 1 second of aligning. We would have been killed. Our bookmarks are so off-center at the Paleo that it will take us a lot of undocking, redocking, undocking to get the right roll to randomly point us in the same direction off-center that our bookmarks are. If you're living in a station where the chance of hostility on the undock is high, ideally, you will actually create an array of insta-undocks at slightly different angles so that when you do undock and there are hostiles on grid, you can go into first-person view and just figure out which of your insta-undock bookmarks you happen to be currently pointed towards. And then you can right-click on that bookmark right in space and warp to it directly. So now if I undock in Aaron and go into first-person view, look at that. It looks like I should still burn a few more even further off to the left. But now I can just be like, oh, undock 3? I'm aligned to that. Away we go. I'm going to take Aaron over to the Grav Lab, and then we'll come back and try and undock a less nimble ship. Okay, so we've undocked. We're pointing almost directly at our undock bookmark. And you'll notice that when we click warp, even though there's a hurricane sitting here waiting to blap us, we'll still visually see our ship aligned to the bookmark, but it immediately says warp drive active. So we're able to get away. That visual aligning doesn't actually make us vulnerable unless you see the text point up above your capacitor saying aligning to warp vector. Now there's a Saber on the station as well, who's launched an interdiction probe. So we're going to get out of here, and we're not going to come back. Not for a while. And that was the proof. That was exactly the situation that our catalyst got blapped in before. High scan resolution artillery ship sitting on the undock. But this time, because we had a good undock bookmark, we were able to get out no problem. Every time you lose a ship, it's about learning lessons. It may seem unfair to get insta-locked and alpha out of space, but in every situation in this game, there is some counterplay if you look at the mechanics involved and figure out, okay, how did he do that? What could I do differently? And so, after all of those trials and tribulations, we are once again ready to get out there and get some stuff done. Torrance the Thrasher is finished building. He is fully fit. Core probe launchers up in the high, full rack of autocannons, damage selection. This is a great Thera expedition ratting ship, and there is a wormhole to Stain open right now to a system that actually has some belts in it. Let's go kill some stuff.
Clear, I feel the end and it's near. The day of reckoning's here. The sound of deafening fear.